Hello, my name is Lance Wilbur.
And I'm Dwayne Lemon.
And we'd like to welcome you to another episode of TKS, a true knowledge of self, where we get to know ourselves from a biblical perspective. For those of you just tuning in, we've been going over a story. The story is Dwayne Lemon's, and we discussed the fact that we're involved in a war. We talked about this war in the book of Revelation chapter 12, and we saw that it began in heaven, and we saw that it now has come to the earth. And the war, the battle is waged over the control of humanity's minds. And we talked about the fact that the Bible in verse 11 of chapter 12 gives us insight into how humanity can overcome and gain a victory in this warfare. And it shows that they overcame them by the blood of the Lamb, which we'll be talking about in future episodes, and by the word of their testimony. So we're talking about Dwayne Lemon's testimony. We're talking about his story. We saw how he was reared in the heart of New York City in Hollis, Queens. We talked about his upbringing and coming from virtual obscurity and getting involved heavily into the hip hop scene, into the dance aspect of hip hop. And eventually he got his break, and eventually he found himself entrenched in the industry. And this is where we left off, and we're going to be picking up from that point. And so I'd like to now ask you some questions again, and kind of, sure, if you could just bring us up to speed and help us understand in brief. You came from a regular family, if you will, and found yourself now fully entrenched in the hip hop industry as a dancer, choreographer. Again, just show us where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about how many individuals try to make it in entertainment, whether it be through singing or poetry, rhyming, dancing, or whatever, acting, you get literally millions of people throughout North America alone, let alone throughout the world, who are trying to make it to the top. So imagine you got this young black child growing up in Hollis, Queens, New York, listening to hip hop like anybody else, going to the clubs, going to the parties, but now here it is that I was able to actually work with the people that one day I used to watch on television and was entertained by them. Now I'm on television and I'm entertaining people. It felt like I arrived. That's the best way that I can explain it. I'm making more money than I could have ever imagined. I'm also on television. I have people adoring me and admiring me, and I can get any girlfriend I want or anything. So, I mean, I had my own choices now. A lot of people wanted to be my friend and to hang out with me. So at this stage in my life, I felt practically like what some would call even a God on earth, because, you know, when you think of God, you think of one who gets adoration, someone who gets worship, someone who people are willing to sacrifice so that they can pay homage to this person and receive his blessings. This is how people were treating me. And this is how people are treated in the entertainment industry. They're treated as gods. They're treated as individuals that are superior to natural humanity. So now I'm in that mix, so you can imagine my head is full of self at this point. I'm thinking I am all that and then some. Right. I'm thinking I arrived.
So this is something you were looking for as a young man, in high school even, getting it at a local level, and then now going up to an international level. You're on tours now.
Yep.
So who are some of the people that you're working with at this point?
Well, at that point, again, I was working with people like Queen Latifah. I was working with, a hip-hop group that was called A Tribe Called Quest, which was led out by a rapper named Q-Tip. I think he's still pretty much out there today. You have individuals like Busta Rhymes. You have individuals like the Wu-Tang Clan with Method Man and all these folks. Then you have people in more the R&B scene. Again, this was like Brandy, Keith Sweat, working with people like Silk or Boyz II Men. This was the era that I was in. So it was working with people like that that made me up to this quote-unquote celebrity status as far as a dancer was concerned. I was amazed at how much dancers receive so much adoration. And again, because I moved from being just a dancer, performer, to now a choreographer. So now I'm not only performing the steps, but I'm creating the steps. So there's a major notoriety that comes with that, to the point that now, not only the common people that you meet on a day-to-day basis in the world, they were adoring you, but even people very much in the industry, because now they're looking at you as an innovative person, a creator.
Right,
of something.
So now artists are looking to you because you can make them look better.
Exactly, exactly. So now I became an asset to them.
How much, for example, from a regular, base level dancer to a choreographer, what's the money difference? I mean,
Base level dancer can do a music video, maybe make anywhere from $200 to $300. If you are fortunate, you can probably make about $500 or $600, depending on the artist many a times, because some artists have bigger budgets than others.
And again, this is numbers from that time.
Yeah, numbers from that time.
Yeah.
So you're talking again around early 90s. These were the kind of dollar figures that was real to a dancer. Sometimes you got less than $100 too. But when you do choreography, I mean, I could get paid $5,000 just to choreograph one song. And then if you write a contract where you're going to choreograph 12 deals, then you just take 5,000 times 12.
Right.
So the money was drastically different. So once I got a taste of that world, that was a world I didn't want to leave. I said, oh no, I'm going to stay here. Because performing was the easy part. Choreography took much more brain work. It took a lot more thinking and crafting, and therefore it challenged me, and I wanted that challenge. So I accepted that part. So here's where I am now. Now I'm making a good amount of money. I'm traveling. I'm on television. I'm making a name for myself. And now I also wanted to help people too. So I'm doing all that I can to just try to get my name out there and to be as absolutely popular as possible.
Right. So you were also mentioning that there was a void, that even, growing up, childhood, teenage years, there was a void. You tried to fill it with different things. Now you have material wealth. You can pretty much do whatever you want, go wherever you want. You're around traveling globally now.
Yeah.
And the void still exists. What is it, or what are some of the things that sounded the alarm or were the red flags that showed you that the industry did not have what it took to fill that void?
It was the quiet moments. That's why you'll find in the world generally, and especially in the hip hop and R&B culture and industry, there's always activity. You're always doing something. You got to keep yourself engaged. You got to keep yourself moving on to the next project, next program, next place, or what have you. Because if you have too many of those quiet moments, when you study the Bible, you'll remember that God doesn't always speak through the major tempests or whirlwinds that take place, but it's those still quiet moments where the voice of God speaks most forcibly to the conscience. So it is in those quiet moments when you have downtime. Maybe you're traveling somewhere and you don't have a headset on where you're banging some music through your ears. It's those quiet moments that now you start to listen and you start hearing things, you start thinking about things, and you start picturing life. And before you know it, you start coming face to face with yourself.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's why most of those people at that level, and even in everyday life, people keep themselves busy.
That's the point.
To avoid that quiet time, to avoid the time when you're by yourself. And God, as we understand it now, God speaks to the heart.
That's right.
He really challenges you and challenges what you believe, challenges your course in life.
Exactly. So therefore, that's where this phraseology comes from, quiet your conscience, where they teach you to quiet your conscience. And the way you quiet your conscience is that you have to drown it out by doing something else, either filling your conscience with something else or doing some type of activity, anything that'll take your mind off of that thing that by the grace of God would lead one to God. So it was during the quiet times that I started to see, I'm making money, I'm on television. I'll tell you the truth. There were times that I was on tour and I saw a lot and my eyes were open, because a lot of people think once you get on tour and you're starting to perform, you're going to just see the limelight. You're going to see all of this magnificent stuff. You're going to see the bling, bling, everything. But what happens is you start to see things that if you have a conscience, it bothers you. I remember one rapper, he had 4 women waiting outside of his hotel room just so that they could be used by him as a piece of meat for sexual pleasure to congratulate him for making it another year for his birthday. In other words, there were 4 women waiting outside of his hotel room just so that they could bid him happy birthday by giving their bodies to him. And I remember, because I opened my hotel room, I see these ladies there, and I'm like, what are they doing there? And then I found out the next day why. I was disgusted by that. I mean, I was not like, oh, that was cool. I wish that was the last thing on my mind. In my mind, I said, that is disgusting. I can't believe a woman would degrade herself like that. And therefore, I found that it was the after parties and things of that nature, believe it or not, even though I would perform and I would look like I was very much into what I was doing, when the performance was over and the after party would take place, 9 times out of 10, I wouldn't go to the after parties. I became disgusted with the very people that I was working for.
Now, we talked about this void, and we talked about the other elements of the culture, of hip hop culture. For example, what we've been focusing on for the most part is the having fun element. And that's pretty much the most exploited element, where it's just about having fun and there's nothing else. Anything goes, and there's really no checks and balances. But there is another side. You know, there is the knowledge, the wisdom, what they call the overstanding. So there is the other elements where you're actually supposed to be seeking knowledge and discipline and growing and developing righteousness, truth, all those things. So behind the scenes now, as you're, you know, escalating in your career, were there some of those elements that you're getting exposed to? What were some of the things happening in that side?
Definitely, because of the fact, again, coming from the East Coast, one of the major hip-hop artists in the East Coast was KRS-One. Yep. KRS-One, KRS-O-N-E for one, knowledge reigned supreme over nearly everybody. Right. So he, you know, KRS was real heavy into knowledge. So anytime you listen to KRS-One, he's going to start dropping a lot of knowledge. Yeah. Then, of course, there was the Brand Nubians. You know, you listen to Brand Nubians, Grand Poobah and all these guys. And, you know, again, they're dropping knowledge. The PRT, the Poor Righteous Teachers, all of these different groups, you know, were coming out, and they were bringing in a different aspect. Even though they believed in having fun, they also believed in knowledge and education and science and this, that, and the other.
It wasn't made prominent.
Yeah, it wasn't made prominent by any stretch of the imagination. But nevertheless, it was something intriguing to people who were seeking knowledge or open to knowledge. So I did get exposed to that. And I think that maybe that paved the way to some degree of ultimately where I am even today, because it got me interested in reading. It got me interested in searching myself and starting to really think about, well, what is my role? Because remember, the foundation of hip-hop culture is knowledge of self. You know, when you understand who you are, when you understand, in their case, that you are a God, you know, on earth and so on, that it gives a level of understanding, or as they call it, overstanding, which supposedly puts me at a certain state in my existence where I can start manifesting things that are above and beyond the common man. So I did get exposed to that as well, along with the quote-unquote fun side. The fun side was dominant, no question about it. Yeah. But then I started to see some things that really began to turn me off. I would go to certain parties or clubs that a lot of the artists were holding, and there'd be everything from gunshots. There would be parties where there was fighting. There would be women that would get raped. There were times where I was promised money and I wasn't paid. There were all sorts of things. There were times I would go on tour, and I remember one time working with one artist, and they asked me to grab the bags to carry it on to, you know, the bus, which is what the job of a roadie was. Right. They called them the roadies. And I said, well, I'm not a roadie, I'm a dancer, so the roadie can handle that. And I was told, you know what, you better do it, or else if you don't, you're going to have to find your way back home. And
were you told that nicely?
I was not told that, not even halfway nicely. So, you know, I got exposed to that, and this was the stuff that people don't see. They don't see. I saw a man get a gunshot right in his eye and die instantly. That, I can't erase that picture from my head. I've seen individuals get bludgeoned to death by even corrupt police officers who would take these guys and bring them. I saw several police officers bring one man into a bathroom, and the door is this way, and they're supposed to go outside to the police car. But instead, they bring the man to the bathroom, and you hear this man screaming for dear life as they began to beat him and bludgeon him to death, where his face was covered with blood and swollen. These are the pictures that I saw that I said, wow, you know, this is not what I thought.
Right, so there is an element to the street life and to that culture and that environment that nobody can deny is negative.
No doubt.
And there's people that find themselves trapped in it, if you will, or they have no other choice and no other alternative. But it's sometimes left unsaid. In other words, there's individuals, like you mentioned, there's certain artists who make it prominent and highlight the problems, highlight the challenges of that kind of lifestyle. But many of them, I can't say all, but many of them don't provide a practical and viable solution.
Right.
So, and I'd like to speak to the audience for a moment. For those of you who have absolutely no idea what we're talking about in some of these terms that we're using, we're going to be dealing with these subjects moving forward, and we're going to go in detail and deal with some of the things that we're talking about and really explain and kind of break it down and kind of peel the curtain back so that we can see if these things are indeed as viable as they are promoted to be, or is there something better? Is there a better choice? Is there a better way? So again, we understand those dynamics, at least now I hope so. Now, as you're seeing these things and you're making these moral judgments and you're saying this is wrong, this can't be, and how is it now affecting you? How is it changing your perspective? Is it changing your attitude towards the industry?
It's funny. I'm starting to gradually see the light, quote unquote, because, you know, again, I came into entertainment with an attitude that this is going to be the best thing in the world. And granted, there is money. There's no question about that. There's lots of sex. There's no question about that. All of the pleasures of this world are definitely in the industry. And they're there because it's an entrapment. It's something put together by the enemy himself. You know what I'm saying? God already spoke about this in the book of 2 Timothy, chapter 3. From verses 1 to 4, God talks about it. He talks about in the last days, perilous times shall come. There's going to be people who are lovers of their own selves, you know, and all of these different things. But then in verse 5, he says, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. Yeah. So even when I would see these pleasure lovers, and there's lots of pleasure to be fulfilled in there, at the end of the day, it still left the heart void. Yep. It didn't fulfill. So I started to go through that. So there were those quiet moments, going to bed at night. That's why some people, they smoke weed until they can't smoke it anymore. It's anything that takes the mind into another world instead of facing the real world.
Right, fantasy.
Fantasy. So here it is. I'm kind of turned off. I'm making money. It's my job, and I'm treating it like a job, but I'm really not enjoying myself because I've been exposed to enough now that I said, you know what? This culture is presenting something that is not true. It's not very real. It appears real. People call it real, but it's not. That's why, you know, God gave us the inspiration for this, because the foundation, again, of hip hop and R&B culture is knowledge of self, but God's word gives us a true knowledge of self. And the true knowledge of self is where you're going to end up finding that peace. And we're going to build on that. But I was looking for something better than what they had. A friend of mine, TJ, his stage name was Psycho. And TJ was an amazing dancer. But what happened was we went on tour with Latifah, and then we came back for a break. We were supposed to go back on tour. Well, TJ calls me up, and I knew that he was a church-going guy. So he calls me up and he says, hey, man, listen, I can't go back on tour. I said, why not? He said, because Christ and the world cannot mix. Now, when he said that to me, that sounded like Greek. I was like, what are you talking about, Christ and the world? I don't even understand that. But he said, Dwayne, you're going to understand sooner or later that if you're going to give your life to Jesus, you got to be with him. And if you're going to be in the world, then be of the world, but you can't ride the fence. And to me, it didn't make sense at all. But it was a seed that was planted. It was like Isaiah 55 in verse 11, where the Bible says, so shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It will not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please in that thing whereto I sent it. It was accomplishing what God wanted to do in my mind, but at the beginning of it, I couldn't understand it. So therefore, it was through him making this stand for Jesus and trying, of course, to get me to follow Jesus, that I was like, no, I'm not really interested in that right now. I want to make money. I want to get big.
It planted a seed.
But it definitely planted a seed, no question. So it was through that something major happened in my life, which actually caused a paradigm shift. And I believe this paradigm shift is the same paradigm shift that a lot of people have gone through. Unfortunately, some may need to go through. I don't want people to go through this, but sometimes we need things to wake us up. My nephew, Charlie, who was just about a year or two younger than me through my sister, Laverne, he really wanted to make money like his uncle. He's in Brownsville, Brooklyn, New York. They're not making a lot of money. Brownsville was codenamed Murderville. So he's in an area that's really, really bad. And he decided to sell drugs. And the night he sold drugs was the night he was killed. And he was gunned down by people who professed to be his friends. And when I went to his funeral, and I'm looking at this closed casket because his head was so wounded badly that they couldn't even have an open casket. And I'm looking at this casket and my nephew's in there. And as I'm looking at this casket, I'm mad because I'm like, if you wanted money, I would have gave you money. You know, a lot of things going through my mind. But when that casket started to go down into the ground, and I felt like for the first time he was being pulled out of my life, it was at that moment that I started to cry and I really felt like he's gone, you know? And then I went into the limousine, and when I went into the limousine, this is the first time. It was like all the voices in the limousine were drowned out. And I heard a voice as clear as day, and that voice was saying, will you accept me now? Will you accept me now? And it was from hearing that voice that even though I'm completely ignorant of the Bible, I remember the few little stories that I've heard about how God could speak to someone. And in my mind, I said, this has got to be God talking to me. So therefore, I said in that limousine, yes, Lord, I will accept you in my life. And it was from that point that I began this journey now of trying to understand what does it mean to be a Christian.
Right. So you start going to church? Are you hooking up with your boy?
Yeah, I
TJ?
mean, I called TJ up. I said, all right, talk to me. What do I got to do? And he said, well, you need to go to church.
All right.
And I said, all right. And he was going to the Pentecostal church, so I went there with him.
So you started attending church and, you know, taking that path, still in the industry.
Yep.
So how did you make the transition out? How did that continue to escalate, the moral depravity of the industry? What was the final straw there?
The moral depravity of the industry is a constant climb higher and higher, okay? So definitely, you see the moral depravity big time. It just gets worse and worse and worse. But as I started to read the Bible a little bit more and everything, you know, things started opening up to me. Now, I got to be honest with you, man. I went to the Pentecostal church. Now, when I see a bunch of people that are running around and speaking in languages that I know I don't understand, and I'm trying to figure out why they're doing this, what's going on here, and it doesn't make sense to me. So as a result of that, I left. I got turned off. I'm going to be honest with you, because I started feeling like these people are faking it. I didn't even think it was genuine.
Right.
So therefore, I left that church, and then I went to the Catholic church, and then I'm trying to go ahead and see what's happening there. You know, it was communion. I took a little of the grape juice, so I thought, but it was alcohol. And I was familiar with alcohol because that's my old world. But nevertheless, I'm like, a church that serves alcohol? You know, so things weren't making sense.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely, I'm getting exposed to Christianity on a deeper level than I've ever been before. But at the same time, I'm getting turned off with Christianity now because I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. And in hip hop, because of the building of the knowledge of self principles, my brother was part of a group called Nuwabians. And the Nuwabians, you know, we'll probably build on that in another episode, but, you know, they're basically like the 5%ers, the old 5%ers. And what they would instill in my mind is that Christians are people who just don't really understand what they believe. The Bible is a white man's book.
Yeah.
You know, and they would just go down the list of all these reasons why I should not be a Christian.
Yeah.
Going to these churches, seeing the confusion and all these other things reinforced what I was hearing from hip hop, you know, from that exposure that I had. So I got to a point that I was like, look, I'm really getting turned off with this. I'm turned off with hip hop, but quite honestly, I was even more turned off with the pictures of Christianity that I was seeing.
Right.
Hip hop to me was more genuine. They're like, look, this is who we are and this is what we're about.
Right,
and their lifestyles were consistent.
Right.
Where Christians were people who were going around like, this is what we believe, but it was total hypocrisy.
Right.
But I knew that there had to be something right about the Bible. There had to be something right about Christianity, but I think I was getting some foul pictures.
Right. So you're being exposed, you're chasing knowledge of self, if you will. And you think it's here, it's not there, you try something else, and you find yourself now becoming grounded in the Nuwabian way, and, you know, in that whole circle and crossing paths with all the, you know, the Black Moors and the 5%ers and the NOI and all these people now sharing some of the same circles.
Yep.
Were you challenged with the industry? I know that you turned something down, you know, towards the end.
Well, basically what happened was this. In my quest for really trying to understand myself, God, and his will for my life, I found myself at a point where I was confused in the hip hop culture in Nuwapu. I was also confused as it related to Christianity of what I was exposed to. So I found myself on a Friday night giving God an ultimatum and telling him, if you don't let me know who you are by tomorrow, I'm just going to totally give up on Christianity and I'm just going to go ahead and join with the Nuwabians because it made more sense. It was from that the following day, a friend of mine found a flyer laying on the street. She brings it to my house and she shows me all these topics that are on the flyer that were exactly the questions that I had issues about.
Like what were some of them?
Oh man, well, first of all, where's my existence as a black man? Because they instilled this into me in the part of hip hop culture that I was exposed to. Angels are white, patriarchs are white, prophets are white, Jesus is white, everybody's white. The only black man was Simon of the Cyrenes who carried Jesus' cross. And you know, and when they build that package up right, it does kind of create an indignation in you, like, what's going on? Where am I? Where are my people? Where's my identification? So when this man had a study on the role of the African American in the Bible, I said, wow, I never heard that before. He had a study that night called The African American and the Pig. I was like, wait a minute, Christians talk about not eating pork? I know that from the Islamic influence, but not from Christians. So sure enough, man, I had to go. So I went. It was 15 minutes from my house. Went down, heard it, and it was the most explosive thing I ever heard in my life. I mean, everything was biblical, everything. And from that, I said, who are you people? What are you teaching? And they began to do Bible studies with me. They began to walk me through the Word of God. And it got me to a point that I made a decision to go all the way with Jesus and to follow him and to keep his word and by his grace live his words.
All right, so you came to the truth as you understood it at that time.
Yeah.
And you've been walking that path ever since. Now, what was the final challenge that the industry threw at you to try to trap you in there and where you had to make a decision for or against the truth?
Well, what happened was, as I began to study the Bible, I began to learn about the importance of God's people keeping his commandments. In keeping his commandments, it meant all and not some. So therefore, when I look at James chapter 2 and it says that if I break one, I'm guilty of breaking all, I said, all right, well, obviously I want to honor God and keep all of his commandments, which of course includes the fourth commandment, which includes the seventh day Sabbath. So when I began to understand that, I started telling everybody in the industry, I said, look, I can't work on Sabbaths. And they said, Saturdays are our biggest days.
Right.
Friday nights and Saturdays. That's our biggest selling days, bigger tickets. So it got to a point that in the beginning, because of the money pull, I found myself selling out on the Lord.
Yep.
And I began to do my own thing. But then over time, the conviction started to dwell so heavily that I remember one time I was with Heavy D. We went on tour and I was dancing anyhow, even though I knew it was wrong. And I was dancing on the Sabbath, you know? And as I began to understand that, it got to a point in my experience that God spoke to my heart and he said, son, if you continue doing this, you will never come back to me. It was kind of like God was saying, and I love the words that God used. It wasn't, if you keep doing this, I'll cut you off. God says, if you keep doing this, you won't come back to me.
Right.
Because you'll get so entrenched in it. I had to make a decision beyond my feelings. And therefore, I went and I called them up and I said, that's it. And it was over with the entertainment industry. It got to a point that I realized that the entertainment industry and God's commandments are at variance one with another. And in any Christian, any person who claims to love Jesus and wants to follow God's word, Jesus' words says, here's the proof. If you love me, keep my commandments. John 14:15. So it got to a point that I had to realize if I love God, I need to do what he says, even though it's not what my heart wants.
That's an absolutely amazing story, and you were able to overcome, and you moved from that lifestyle into a lifestyle with Christ. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and we're going to continue. We're going to talk about a little bit about my story, my testimony. So we want to encourage you to come back again, visit us again, invite a friend, and we want to remind you again in Proverbs 2:6, it says, "The Lord giveth wisdom, and out of his mouth comes knowledge and understanding."